probably have you or somebody count us down when you want to.
Okay, I'm
Live
still
on
waiting for
Facebook.
Chelsea.
Huh?
I'm waiting for Chelsea
No problem.
Davis.
All right.
Give her a couple more minutes, and then if she doesn't make it, then we'll start.
No worries. Yeah, just let us know before you start so we can roll Facebook and stuff.
Okay. All right. Just to let you know, you'll be using this mic. Does it reach right here so the two of you can use it? Put it over here. So you and the alert guy can, and then you two can share the same mics you use. So, and to use the mic, you have to turn it on. So the light will be green by the speaker part. Ask questions into the mic.
Okay.
So that people are watching online too. Okay, so put your lipstick on, lipstick here.
We already know. We're not in the shop.
Easier to have a next slide.
They just can hear us.
Yeah.
And see us.
And you can address her as Member Paltin. And you can address me as Gorgeous. No. Chair Lee.
I'm going to accidentally do that. Like, that was
I'm
awkward.
going to like
She
you.
said it could.
Yeah.
I'm going to like you.
Yeah.
Another 2 minutes and we'll get started.
Yeah.
We are live on Maui Alert.
We are?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for noticing.
Yeah, no worries.
Right on time, just so you know. We were.
Oh, yeah, you were. Okay, she may not be coming, so
Yeah,
we may
it's
as well
okay.
get
Yeah.
started. Okay? Adam? Are we live on Akaku or should we do a countdown?
We can.
You want to do a countdown? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. Apparently I'll be doing the countdown. Let me get close to the microphone.
Here.
I'll have a quick escape.
And then don't turn it off.
All right. Okay, and testing. 1, 2. Okay, so we turn the flip it up. And now it's on. Okay. All right. Welcome to the press conference. And in 5, 4, 3, 2.
1, go. Aloha, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming to our Virgin experience with the press, our press release for the first time. And our first guest today will be Councilmember Tamara Paltin, who will be talking primarily about recovery steps going on right now in Lahaina as a result of the wildfires. And I just want to say that the council has been working very hard on this issue and has made great strides to get public input because the recovery and resiliency plan that we wish to put together will be community driven. So at this time, I would like to introduce to you Councilmember Tamara Paltin.
Aloha mai kakou. We just had a great committee meeting at the Lahaina Civic last night from about 5 to 8, and it was our second meeting in Lahaina. The first one was at the West Inn on September 27th, and it was mainly listening sessions for the council to hear priorities from the community about things that they would like us to do for them or pass on to the state and like that. My understanding is the EPA expects to finish phase 1, which is the removal removal of hazardous household materials a little bit after Thanksgiving. And the re-entry process is over 41% of zones are able to be re-entered. Phase 2, the debris removal is starting November 1st for upcountry. I think Dawson was selected as the contractor. Tomorrow at the BLNR, I think agenda items D9 and D10 will talk about the possibility of using Olowalu as a landfill temporary disposal and final disposal site. The debris streams that we learned about are recyclable metal, recyclable concrete, hazard trees, which are hazards to the crew, hazardous trees, which is hazardous to roads and structures, non-recyclable metal, concrete, and ash debris, which includes soil that is going to be removed 6 inches down the ash footprint around the building structures, as well as vehicles and vessels. When I drove out this afternoon, I was following a big truck that had like maybe 12 or 15 crushed, burned cars, and so it was a little slow going, and I imagine there'll be a lot more of that. I think that's pretty much the update.
Maybe you can talk about the priorities that people mentioned to us.
Priorities, definitely long-term housing. People are having some difficulty being constantly moved, either from room to room or property to property or side of the island to another side of the island. It's difficult when folks are saying, you know, you need to apply for jobs when you don't have like a long-term housing place. Some of the difficulties in staying in the hotels, especially the ones without kitchens, is, you know, some people have specific dietary needs, whether they have, you know, diabetes or, you know, allergies. Sometimes their kids just won't eat the types of food they're being served, and if there's no kitchen facility, they're not allowed to cook in their rooms at all. That could be a reason that they're asked to leave the hotels. Another priority is childcare. It's difficult to go to work. There was some distrust about sending children back to school about a quarter-mile above the burn zone, and, you know, concern for when phase 2 starts. It sounded as though they would be monitoring how the debris removal goes in Kula to get a sense of what to prepare for in Lahaina. There were some suggestions made about, you know, the short-term rentals being used as long-term rentals. There was suggestions made about specifically Wahikuli being rebuilt. A lot of those houses are surrounded by other houses on sewer, but they're specifically on cesspool, and so there's concern if they have to put in septic, if there's space for a leach field, and the added expense and time that it would take to do that before they're allowed to rebuild. So request to temporarily be able to reconnect to their cesspools, and for the county to come in with sewer, as we've been talking about it for at least the past 20 years, and it makes sense. I mean, they're surrounded by sewer hookups.
The other thing is evacuation routes, prevention, and closing of certain hubs.
Yeah, those were also concerns they brought up. the evacuation route from the school goes right into where the fires usually start, and it's very dry right now.
Prevention
Fire prevention.
and hubs.
And some people mentioned that Kilauea-Makai, Manakwai Park, and S-turns were slated to transition out, and it's those places are kind of places where people feel comfortable going to, and have built up relationships, and they get to see community. So maybe they weren't ready for that transition yet, but we do understand that the community also would like their park spaces to enjoy as well. So it's difficult.
Ready for our first question? Yes, Alai. Is it Ali from
Recording
KITV?
has started.
Obviously, a lot of residents expressing frustration. They don't see their concerns met. Could you maybe respond to that? It's something that was brought up during last night's meeting.
They thought, they did present a very loud and direct message that they weren't ready for tourism to open. And, we on the council did what we could to support that. We passed the resolution, which also get passed on to the state, and that's kind of the scope of our authority. We did what was in our authority to support what we heard, but that is a good point. We don't have a magic wand, and one of the other frustrations was that people wanted to rebuild right away. As soon as their lot gets cleared of debris, they'd like to go back and just sometimes rebuild exactly what they had. But from the talks I had with the Office of Recovery, there's damage assessment and infrastructure like water and sewer in some places, and what I was told is there's all these things that needs to be made safer, and if we rebuild it, everything back exactly as it was, then it will be exactly as it is. And a lot of the streets were very narrow, and so we need to have discussions with the community as a whole, with the departments, and see what that vision of building back safer than what it was ultimately looks like. And obviously not everybody's going to agree, especially if it's if you want to make it a two-way street when it's in the historic district, and so you need an easement off somebody's property or something, or if their property was right at the edge of the ocean and the infrastructure is no longer there, is it that we're going to rebuild that infrastructure with the knowledge of what the sea level rise predictions are? And so I don't have those answers, but it's definitely discussions that need to take place, and find a way forward to make sure everybody's concerns are addressed, and that it's safe, and we get the most for what we build back. If we're gonna put in like a brand new water line right next to the ocean, and the lifespan of it is till the next big storm event, is that the best use of the limited funds we have?
And then Star Advertiser?
Sure, thanks. This question could be for you or Chair Lee. What are your views on the pace of the zone's reopening? The pace so far?
Well, from the first zone to the second zone was very slow, and it gave Maui Emergency Management Agency a chance to work out the kinks of what needs to be done better, and it seems to be speeding up, which is good. I know a lot of people are ramping up. I think more so than the piece, what I've repeatedly heard is they want to have an order so that they may not know the time frame when their particular zone will open up, but if they see where they are in line, then they can make that arrangements. You know, some folks have relocated to the mainland, some folks are elderly and they're having their children that live far away come and assist them, and without knowing when they are in the lineup, it's difficult to make those kind of arrangements. Initially, they were kind of looking, and then they started a little bit from the south, and so just that's the main concern I'm hearing from folks, is being able to know the order so that they know if this zone opens up, I'm next. Start looking at flights or whatever the case may be. Time off of work, whatever.
Also, it's about 50% completed as of today. So it is moving at a more rapid pace. And, but again, we have to be extremely careful. Okay. We have to be extremely careful because we're talking about public health and safety. And we want to make sure that the properties are as in good condition as possible when people return. Any more questions from you? From start, Civil B?
Hey, thanks for making the time. Really appreciate it. One question I had comes from something I just learned about yesterday up at Kula when I joined the House Finance Committee for its field trip, and we heard from the CRS, Natural Conservation Resource Service, which is under the USDA, about their plan to control all this loose soil that no longer has vegetative cover, and the plan that they're proposing, or about to officially propose, but that's on track, is to drop a lot of seeds of the same invasive grasses that were the fuel, the buffalo guinea. They haven't identified the specific ones, but that's very much like moving forward, and I was very surprised to learn it, and some others I called who are experts in alien pest species were as well. So I was just curious, like, have they been consulted with any council leadership or council members? And what are your thoughts on this plan that's in the works, apparently?
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard about that. You know, I've been so immersed in Lahaina, I haven't visited the burn sites up country, and it's just, you know, secondhand information of what is going on up there. For Lahaina, there are bioremediation groups going on, and I know that they're discussing it, but this is the first that I heard that the soil stabilization involves replanting the invasive grasses that you know, contribute to those fires. I don't know that that's been vetted by the community up there or Lahaina, but I would hope we can do it differently. Maybe it's the opening point for a discussion amongst those in the conservation field and the community that lives there.
Yeah, that's all I can share for timeline is what they shared, which is they're working on damage assessment reports for the next couple weeks. I guess they have crews in the field. Then they plan to make those will be a game plan of sorts, and they'll run that up USDA for funding and approval. And then they were talking about dropping the seeds within a couple 100 days.
Are they working with state DOFA and DLNR?
That came up, but was unclear if they're actually working closely with them or not.
That's very disturbing information, so you can bet that we'll be checking up, following up on your comments today. We weren't aware of it.
Thanks. A quick related follow-up. Just one of the reasons was...
I think there's a button on the microphone.
It's
on.
just speak into it.
Yeah. One of the reasons they provided for doing invasives was just that there's not enough native seeds available, and so some folks weren't quite convinced of that. Different experts I talked to, but I just wanted to share that as well in case you had any comment.
Yeah, I know Pu'ukui watershed in West Maui does do seed collection, so I don't know if they're in touch with all of the folks out there. But like Charity said, we can try follow up, and if they need to be connected, and if there are that resource available. I mean, especially at the elevation that Kula is at, it would be nice to see natives put back in.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, sure.
Good afternoon, it's Paul Aker, Maui Alert. Thank you for having us, Councilmember Paltin. Two quick, easy questions for you. First relates to Hurricane Lane, and we have reported that you were in attendance at that county meeting, the town hall meeting, following shortly thereafter, where people vociferously voiced complaints about such things as dry hydrants, no alert systems, no sirens, many of the same things that we saw become very problematic in the August 8th fire. So the question is, based on the fact that you then became a council member and have headed the DRIP, which is in part responsible for disaster, and chair that committee, do you have any regrets not being more proactive following that meeting where all those concerns were laid out and yet they were repeated, some of the concerns?
Yeah, I definitely have a huge regret that Lahaina burnt down and that, so many people lost their lives. I did try to follow up. I've been the chair of DRIP since the beginning of this year. The previous 2 terms, I was the chair of the Planning and Land Use Committee, and we did try to put in safeguards in the community plan for West Maui as that moved through the process. At the meeting, I was mostly trying to coordinate with the Department of Environmental Management on the removal of the vehicles and the debris. At that point, they had no prearranged disaster contracts, and so everything to get done was taking much, much longer than it did this time. And I'm not sure if it's because of who was in charge at that time in terms of the Director of Environmental Management. This time, within 3-4 days, rubbish pickup in West Maui started up. There were dumpsters being placed around and things like that. In the fires, after the fires in 2018 and 2021, I have spoken with, at that time it was Mahina Martin about, concerns about turning off the electricity when there's high winds like that. It was never, they never determined it was due to electricity lines that the fire had started, but many people believe that's how it started. And in my conversations with the electric company at that time, the excuses that they had given were that, well, if they turn off the electricity, people could get into car accidents because the traffic lights aren't working, or people with medical equipment wouldn't have the power to have their oxygen or whatever they need. And at that time I said, well, I think the power didn't come back on to West Maui for a few weeks, so preventatively turning it off would have been the call to make. And they said, well, we just can't take that kind of risk. And then I asked, well, what about burying the power lines? And they said, well, it's a historic district, it's very expensive, there's concerns about EV kupuna, and they kind of just ended the conversation there. I did have discussions with Herman and Daya at that time about the placement of supplies in rural areas, about the idea of tents and hubs at our county parks. So when it happened in 2023 and there was no communication, my neighbors and I just said, he knows because we had this discussion. You know, we're gonna set up tents in the parks and we're gonna be there to support the people. In terms of brush abatement, I did have many conversations with the Pu'ukukui watershed crew, Pomaikai, Kaneopio Crozier, and he said, you know, this annual fires that we're getting, it didn't used to happen so much when, I guess at that time, Miko used to do brush abatement under their lines. And so when I followed up with Miko, they said, well, you know, that's very expensive. We're looking into doing other things. And did not receive any answers as to what those other things specifically were. We did, when Kelly King oversaw MEMA, she had repeatedly asked them about like redundancy in communication methods, because that's not the only time that communications were knocked out when we had a fire. You know, there were times when I worked the beaches where there was a fire on the Pali, and the fire department asked us to stay later because they wouldn't be able to do ocean rescue, and there was no communication. So, you know, I'm thinking, like, are people gonna be able to call 911 without any telephone lines? And you know, Mr. Andaya's responses was like, oh, we're working on it, or we're going to use radio. And then in our vulnerability update, it was brought up that unlike in previous years, the radio stations are not always manned, especially in the evening hours. Although I don't think that was the case, because this fire had started in the afternoon time. And so Chair Lee did ask interim administrator Daryl Oliveira about what has changed, and he went over some of the things that they're putting in place with the radio stations. As to the sirens, I can't speak to what they were thinking or doing, but I don't think it was the right call.
So were you able to follow up on any of those conversations to see if any action happened after you brought some of those things up?
Well, so in 2021, on election evening, there was another fire in West Maui, and at that time, it was about the diversion of the stream flow and the interim in-stream flow standards. One of the other questions I had asked the fire chief when the new fire chief was being selected is controlled burns. And, you know, there wasn't, it seemed as though they need the right conditions to do controlled burns, even if it's being used as training and the right amount of staff. I had a lot of conversations, you know, about like, if we need to divert water from the Kuleana users who rely on that water to fight the fires from their homes to a reservoir for the helicopter to dip the bucket in, why are we not just dipping the bucket in the ocean? And his response was that they'll always want to dip the bucket in the closest location to the fire. And if the reservoirs didn't exist and they had to, no other choice but to dip the bucket in the ocean, per FAA guidelines, they would have to shut the road, and then that would take additional manpower and, you know, be an inconvenience to the public. Ultimately, the multiple conversations that I had with folks, I am not the authority over them. It's the Fire and Public Safety Commission, and they have the authority to give reviews and whatnot.
Thank you. And then the second question, the second half of this fast, easy equation, about the short-term rentals. You've been no fan of short-term rentals in the past. You, at one point, I think, suggested, or if not proposed, legislation to convert those to long-term rentals. There is active talk, I believe, between the mayor's office and the governor's office about essentially converting STRs to long-term rentals in favor of fire victims. Would you support that plan? And if so, could you tell us under what conditions?
Yeah, I would support that plan. You know, we're in desperate need of long-term housing and the stability it brings for our displaced residents. Under what conditions? I mean, I'd like to have a broader discussion with all the entities involved. I am aware that short-term rentals, the TAT that they bring with them and the GET are a significant contribution to our county budget. But at the same time, what we would use the county budget for is to probably build that housing, and some of the problems is the resources of water and road infrastructure and those things. And so with the conversion of short-term rental, those infrastructure is somewhat there for that housing ability. I think, you know, the apartment districts make the most sense because those weren't forever short-term rentals. We've seen a big conversion of that in, I think it was 2012 or so. I think some of the conditions that need to be addressed would be tax incentives, also that the rent would be commensurate with the HUD guidelines of rentals, not like, you know, $10,000 for a one-bedroom or something like that. My understanding is if it's through a direct leasing from FEMA, then FEMA takes on the responsibility. You know, if the person's short-term rental is damaged or not vacated or whatever, then it's on FEMA. So I think that would be the preferable way to go about it, is a direct lease of short-term rentals through FEMA.
Thank you for the response. I guess I would just ask, if you went with the HUD rates, those probably wouldn't be enough to sustain a lot of people that have mortgages on their short-term rentals. Is there any way to get around that? Any solution maybe in mind to help those, you know, potential short-term rental owners that would be now facing hardship?
Well, I mean, I guess, you know, we not me specifically, but of the HUD fair market rate it is, if, you know, some of the entities that were collecting money would supplement what FEMA is able to provide, like offset it. Because when Fenton was here, like, you know, they said that they would give HUD fair market value for what they had before. If it was a one-bedroom, what HUD fair market value is for a one-bedroom, two-bedroom, three-bedroom, and that there are nonprofits that can assist with like first and last months or the down deposit or whatever. If it's going to be a percentage over HUD, maybe we can talk with, you know, Hawaii Community Foundation or fund, that entity that brought in over $100 million, about, you know, breaking down how many families are still in non-congregate shelter and need long-term housing, and what could be used and how much to ensure that that enough people have this long-term housing so that they're not feeling so pressured while we're doing debris removal and the rebuild and things like that. And there's definitely different types of folks, you know, the folks that were renters to begin with, if they still have their job, maybe might be able to supplement some. If they were renters and they don't have a job, and having the long-term housing would allow them to get a job, you know, or people that own their home and now are faced with trying to still pay their mortgage and find a new place to live and all the expenses involved in raising their families and just day-to-day living.
Adam?
Thank you. Is this on? Adam Lightplay with Maui Community Media, Kaku. This question is for either of you. There's been a lot of discussion both from the public and even from experts regarding the schools opening up so close to the toxic burn zone. And I know the Department of Education is a state department, but I'm wondering, for you as council members, do you have any veto power, or is there anything other than a strongly worded resolution to the state? Is there a way that you can at some point say, no, this is too dangerous to our citizens, we're going to overrule you or demand something different? So I'm wondering where the county can get involved in that if you feel that something that important is going on.
My personal veto power is I'm not sending my own children back. I have strong concerns. When I went to the high school football game, we stood in the wind and it was blowing konas by halftime of the varsity game. My husband had a hard time to breathe. Both of us had headaches and I had tingling around my eyes, nose, and mouth, so we just left. When I spoke to the Department of Health about that, he said, you know, I'm not discounting your symptoms. I totally believe that you did have it, but the data and the science shows that we believe it's safe. But he understood that, you know, it's a choice that parents need to make for their own children, and as do I. The issue to me is that we're not being given options if we make that choice. My children are in immersion. The only other option is to take them either to Hana or Kalama, and that's not realistic for me. Some of my children's classmates' parents got calls today that if they don't show up, they will be disenrolled from Kulakaiapuni. The Kulakaiapuni teachers in the middle school are not feeling safe going to work either. One of the kumu went to her classroom and had headaches after 2 hours. And so, you know, I don't think it's right for the state not to have options, especially with the unknown of phase 2. If parents and students and teachers want to return to school, then the DOE should support that. If they don't want to return to that location, that should also be supported. And for us, Kulakaiapuni o Lahaina, we were in the process of securing another site, getting funders, building a new school, and the DOE said no. We had been working with them all along on environmental assessment, soil samples, and when October 17th came, the answer came as a no. So at this time, we're not satisfied, and Hawaii is a 2-language state, and we're not disenrolling our children from Hawaiian immersion. We'd like some options.
I defer to Member Paltin on the subject. I support her on that. Any other questions? Yes, Star Advertiser.
All right, thanks. Andrew Gomes again, Star Advertiser. For Member Paltin and perhaps Chair King as well. Regarding the Charlie, my bad, apologize. Regarding the Oluwalu, potential landfill, can you clarify like your understanding between temporary or permanent? And then do you support the idea, and then does the council have any approval authority for having that happen or not?
If you don't mind, I'd like to explain more fully about the options and the choices and the pros and cons. My understanding is we have two main options. The first option would be the Central Maui landfill, and the second option would be the Oluwalu quarry, the cinder quarry. And my understanding is that Kula debris, ash debris, will be taken to the Central Maui landfill. It's closer, and there were no fatalities in Kula. The process, as it was explained to me, is that the trucks that they'll be using, and I think there's about 51 trucks, and there'll be thousands of truckloads for West Maui at least, but the trucks will be lined with a visclean plastic liner and the ash debris. Although there is soil tack, there may be some dust, and they would use water to try and keep the dust down. There would be a lot of air monitor sensors to see, the particulate in the air. And once the truck liner is filled, it would be, I've heard, wrapped like a burrito, or since this is Hawaii, like a lau-lau. And then heat sealed and transported to the Central Maui landfill for Kula. Whether it is the Central Maui landfill or the Oluwalu site, it would have a temporary storage at either site. So the downside for the Central Maui landfill is the temporary storage is not quite as close to the permanent site. The other downside to utilizing the Central Maui landfill is that it goes in with all of the rest of our trash, which can have organic matter that breaks down into liquid, and that liquid is what forms the leachate, which is what is dangerous and needs to be monitored for at least 30 years. So the pros and cons of using the Oluwalu site. There already is ground and air quality monitors because it already was a landfill, and it's been monitored for almost the whole 30 years. So they do have a baseline readings of what is there. Of course, they would add more, is what I've been told, of groundwater and air quality monitors. The difference is 5 miles versus 25 miles of transport. Also, in Lahaina, we're expecting 300 to 400,000 tons of ash debris, and even if people's bones were recovered, a lot of folks feel like, there is still remains in the ashes of, the people that have not yet been found that there's missing persons report on, and also, part of the issue of not wanting to move Ibi Kupuna is it's not only the bones, it's everything of the person, and so the entire town. And so if that landfill is stood up, the temporary site and the final site is it's not gonna be mixed in with household trash, and so the ash, the soil, non-recyclable metal or concrete has not a big chance of becoming liquid in that site, and so these heat-sealed plastic burritos or lau-laus would be stacked in there, and there's not a good chance of much leachate, if any, to escape. Some of the differences, and I think the reason the DOH is hesitant is their standard specs is a 2-foot clay liner and a 60mm plastic liner. In this case, because of the topography of the Olowalu cinder quarry, what is being proposed by the consultant, which is AMEHR, not sure what that stands for, but third-party consultant to designing a potential landfill and temporary site. They're proposing a 6-inch clay layer with an 80mm plastic liner, which from what I'm told is above and beyond the standard specs for a landfill of that type. And then there would be like a concrete cover that would make water not go in but whisk it away if there were heavy rains, although that site is not super prone to heavy rains with climate change, you don't know. I did ask the susceptibility to earthquakes, and if so, what magnitude it would be. They would monitor similar for 30 years. I mean, it would be nice to monitor it a little bit longer, or maybe in perpetuity. There was brief discussion about that being a memorial site, and they would make, you know, a comfort station and parking and things like that if it's so desired by folks. You know, not really a lot of great options in terms of debris removal. A lot of people would like it shipped away, although some want to be close to, you know, their loved ones' remains. I'm told that taking it off island would multiply the cost by 10, and we would still need to look for a state that would accept it and how much that would cost in addition. The estimated cost of building this landfill, which my understanding is the county would have to pay for it, is 36 million or 35 million or something like that. Is that answer your question?
And then I just want to reiterate that I think most of us support the idea of the remains of the debris going to Olowalu. We, as a council, sent a letter to the state. I believe they're having a meeting tomorrow in support of the Olowalu site because it's so much closer than the Central Maui landfill, which is over 25 miles away. And the idea that people would be closer to their remains, and the fact that if it becomes a memorial and people have the opportunity to spend time there, either at a grieving station or a comfort station, this is important to the people of Lahaina, and we're hoping that the decision will be made in favor of what we're asking, because this will, otherwise it'll just delay the whole process as well. Because for people to rebuild, the debris has to be removed. Any more questions? Anybody on this side? Sylvie?
Thanks again for the time, I really appreciate it. With housing is one of the issues that is very top of mind, top priority that you decided. one of the biggest projects, or the biggest perhaps that I'm aware of, is the Pulelehua project. Just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, we passed a near unanimous resolution supporting it. Ultimately, it's in the mayor's hands at this point. I would just say, you know, if a decision could be made sooner rather than later, because then, you know, if it's a no, then we pivot to another solution, and if it's a yes, then let's get going. So I imagine we voiced our support, but, you know, it's just a project like other projects, and if it's a no, then we need to figure out what we are going to do.
Most of us support Pulelehua. However, it's not clear where the administration stands with that project, even though he knows that the council supports it. And there really aren't many alternatives. That project has been approved in the past for 800 units. So it already has its major approvals. Right now, the developer is looking to make adjustments to the project to possibly add more units because of the fires and the displaced residents needing more rental units. So, you know, we're hoping they would move on it, because other than that project, there might be another one or two, but this one is the most far along than any other project of that size on the west side. So yeah, we are supportive of that project, and we hope that it can be moved forward, because we heard last night that people are very anxious, and they're dealing with a lot of uncertainties, and housing is one of them.
And part of the proposal that the resolution had was it would go from 50% affordable to 100% affordable. And I think there's 100 for sale multifamily, and the rest would be all rentals. And from some of the meetings that I've had with developers, some of the for sale projects that we have approved in the past are talking about converting to rentals because of the high interest rates and the expectation that interest rates will rise further, making it more difficult to pencil out, and for buyers as well because of those high interest rates. So, you know, much of that project was rentals anyway, and it seems like, you know, in the market that we're in and the forecasts with the interest rates, that looks like the direction that a lot of developers are pivoting to right now anyway.
Any more questions? KITV.
Sorry, for Member Paltin. So what have your kids been doing then? Is there a virtual option? I know earlier the DOE mentioned that there would be, but is that the case?
Right now, the kumu that aren't returning to school are still teaching on their sick leave. I think Tuesday they spent the day at the Commission on Water Resource Management. In the month leading up to fall break, they were doing huaka'i. You know, they'd go to Honolua up at Pu'ukui, learn about that, go to Honolua at Honolua Bay, learn about the Makai side. And, you know, with many of those Hawaiiana having lost their houses as well, just being together was more important than the location of the school. And even the children that are at the school right now, I don't think they're being pressured like with a lot of reading and writing and math problems. There's like art and, you know, just kind of trying to focus on normalcy and their well-being. The past 2 weeks after fall break, I've been taking them to Hanakao'o Beach Park, and I think that's the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders there, from 8 to 12-ish. And that lasts as long as the teacher's sick leave. It's very uncertain. I did make a call to someone in the UH system requesting support statewide from the immersion programs, because if this can happen to us in West Maui, where we had a well-established kula kayapuni after a disaster, then no kayapuni program is safe. If we're not being supported and our concerns as to safety is not being taken seriously, whether for English or immersion, then that is how people will be treated statewide, and I don't think that's appropriate. Just looking back on the history of how the World Trade Center was handled and the number of responders who were told, oh, you don't need to wear a mask, and then more people died in the aftermath than responding to the initial incident. And so I think it's important to know that although we know a lot, we don't know everything. And ultimately, if our children become sick 1, 5, 10 years in the future, nobody wants a lawsuit settlement. We want our children to be healthy.
Any more?
One more quick.
Sure. So it'll be.
You mentioned not really knowing where the administration might stand on the Palili Hula project, but stepping back, like just more generally, how's communication been with the mayor and administration?
Improving a bit.
Define improving. No, it has been improving. I think the mayor is realizing that there's another branch of government that he needs to confer with going through this disaster and through anything. And I believe he has made an attempt lately to stay closer in touch with us.
Yeah, we had a fairly lengthy conversation on Sunday before his announcement of the opening of Phase 2 and Phase 3, and I'm hoping it wasn't a one-off because I thought it was beneficial on both sides. And then today I had a good-sized conversation with Ms. Mahi about plans for economic development, because in one of his press conferences or whatever, where he was in Kalini with that 1 hour one, he mentioned that 134 eateries in Lahaina don't exist anymore, and so that was a concern that the major hotel capacity and from Kaanapali to Kapalua still exists, and the capacity of where those folks will eat if it comes back to that what we've seen in the past, especially November, December. And so they're working on some street markets or food truck locations, and I think the initial location that they were looking at, I had some concerns of it being too far outside of Lahaina, and they did run into some resistance from the Department of Transportation. I don't think the conversation is over, but I was able to mention some other locations, and maybe it might not be as big as their first option, but breaking it up into various locations could allow not just one location to get overwhelmed, and just to spread it out, and then people can try different places, whether it's pop-up boutiques in 20-foot pods or food trucks or whatever it is the case, with the holiday season coming up, handmade crafters or whatever. So being able to communicate with the Office of Economic Development more than previously. I was not super stoked on the year past this, I've gotten standing every other week meetings with Josiah Nishita, who is in charge of the Office of Recovery, and open invitation if things pop up in between the 2-week meetings ways that I can reach out to him. So it's definitely from, no telephone, no internet even existing where I was at, to being able to have those types of communications. I would love for it to go beyond and be included in the brainstorming phase. But, as long as we're making forward progress, that's the important thing.
Anything else? KITV.
One really quick one. So the press release mentioned that you folks would plan to hold regular press conferences. Would that be like weekly or monthly?
There's Josiah right now going into one of our offices. Well, I'm going to be talking to the rest of the members and checking their schedules. We'd like to do it maybe every other week during this is what we call our off week, because then we have our committee weeks, and that's hard because we have meetings morning and afternoon. So there would be little time for a press conference. So during the off weeks, but I need to check with our other members. We started with Member Paltin because obviously the disaster and the wildfires in Lahaina, it's on many people's minds, and a lot of people want to know what's going on, including the people in Lahaina. So again, as soon as we decide on who the next person will be, we'll contact all of you, and hopefully you can come. And then we can handle it this way, or you can come with questions first. It's up to you. Whichever works for you guys.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Tamara.